My ex cheated on me, then had the nerve to invite me to his wedding. So I showed up with proof that destroyed everything in front of 200 guests. Getting cheated on is bad enough, but getting invited to watch your cheater marry the person they cheated with, that takes a special kind of audacity. When I opened that cream-colored envelope with gold lettering and saw my name printed in fancy cursive, I couldn't believe it. My ex-boyfriend was getting married to the girl he told me not to worry about, and apparently, he thought I'd want to celebrate with them. He had no idea what I knew, and he definitely didn't expect me to actually show up. The invitation came on a Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from work when I saw it sitting in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but then I recognized the return address. It was from Jake, my ex, the guy I dated for 3 years before everything fell apart. We'd broken up 8 months earlier. The breakup was messy, not screaming and throwing things messy, but the kind where you know something's wrong but you can't quite prove it. Jake had been distant for months, always on his phone, always working late, always too tired to hang out. I'd ask him what was wrong and he'd say nothing, that I was being paranoid, that work was just stressful. Then, one night I went to surprise him at his apartment. I'd brought food because he said he was working from home. When I got there, her car was in his parking spot, a silver Honda Civic that I'd seen before. It belonged to his coworker, Megan, the one he always said was just a friend. I knocked on his door. It took him a long time to answer. When he finally did, his hair was messy and he wasn't wearing a shirt. He looked panicked. Behind him, I could see her sitting on his couch, wearing one of his hoodies, the same hoodie I'd bought him for his birthday. He tried to explain, said it wasn't what it looked like, that they were just hanging out, but I could see the guilt all over his face. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said we were done. Then I left. He tried to call me for weeks after that, sent long texts about how he'd made a mistake, how it meant nothing, how he wanted to work things out. I blocked him everywhere and moved on with my life. Or at least I tried to. And now, 8 months later, he was marrying her, and he'd invited me to watch. I stared at that invitation for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it away and forget about it, but another part of me was curious. Why would he invite me? Was it guilt? Was it some twisted way of proving he'd moved on? Or did he actually think we were on good terms? I opened the envelope. Inside was a card with their names printed in gold. Jake and Megan. The date was set for 6 weeks away. There was a note tucked inside, written in Megan's handwriting. It said they hoped I could come, that they valued my friendship, that they wanted to share their special day with everyone who mattered to them. I almost laughed. Friendship. The girl who'd been sleeping with my boyfriend while we were still together wanted to be friends now. The audacity was actually impressive. I sat there with that invitation in my hand, trying to decide what to do. Should I ignore it? Should I send back a polite decline? Or should I do something else entirely? That's when I remembered something Jake had told me once. A secret he'd shared late one night when we were still together. Something he made me promise never to tell anyone. Something that could ruin him. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I spent the next few days thinking about whether I actually wanted to go through with this. Revenge isn't really my style. I'm not the kind of person who plots and schemes, but every time I thought about Jake and Megan sending me that invitation, acting like what they did was fine, I got angry all over again. So I started digging. I went back through old messages and photos from when Jake and I were together, and I found what I was looking for. About a year into our relationship, Jake had told me about his past. Before he met me, he'd been engaged to someone else, a girl named Sarah. They dated for 2 years and were planning a wedding, but 3 months before the ceremony, Jake called it off. He told me it was mutual, that they'd both realized they weren't right for each other. But that wasn't the whole story. One night when Jake had been drinking, he admitted the truth. He'd cheated on Sarah multiple times with different people, and when she found out, she'd been devastated. She'd called off the wedding and told everyone what he'd done. His family was furious. Her family was furious. It had been this huge scandal. Jake made me promise never to bring it up. He said he was a different person now, that he'd learned from his mistakes, that he'd never do something like that again. Except he had, with me. And now he was about to marry the girl he'd cheated with. I found Sarah on social media. It took some searching, but I eventually tracked her down. She was living in another state now, looked happy, had a fiancé of her own. I sent her a message explaining who I was and asking if we could talk. She responded the next day, said she'd been wondering when someone would reach out, that she'd heard through mutual friends that Jake was getting married again. She asked if I knew what kind of person he really was. I told her I did now, and I told her about the wedding invitation, about how Jake and Megan had acted like everything was fine, like they hadn't destroyed a 3-year relationship. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had something that might help. She sent me screenshots, messages between her and Jake from back when they were engaged, messages where he'd admitted to cheating, where he begged her not to tell anyone, where he'd promised to change if she'd give him another chance. She also sent me photos, evidence of his cheating that she'd kept all these years. She said she'd never gotten closure, never got to say what she needed to say, and if I wanted to use any of it, I had her full permission. I thanked her and spent the next few weeks putting everything together. I didn't want to be cruel. I just wanted the truth to come out. Jake had spent years playing the victim, acting like he was the good guy, and Megan had helped him do it. They'd invited me to their wedding, so I was going to show up, and I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who they were marrying. The wedding was at a country club on a Saturday afternoon. It was beautiful, white flowers everywhere, string lights hanging from trees, a gorgeous view of the lake. Everything looked perfect. I wore a simple black dress, nothing too fancy. I wanted to blend in. I arrived right as the ceremony was starting and slipped into a seat in the back row. Nobody really noticed me. Everyone was focused on the front, where Jake was standing in his tux, looking nervous. The music started and Megan walked down the aisle in this huge white dress. She looked happy, glowing even. Jake was smiling at her like she was the only person in the world. For a second, I almost felt bad about what I was about to do. Almost. The ceremony was short. Traditional vows, the officiant talking about love and commitment and forever. When he got to the part about objections, he paused and looked around the room. Nobody said anything. The room was completely silent. That's when I stood up. Everyone turned to look at me. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. Jake's face went pale. Megan looked confused. The officiant asked if I had something to say. I said I did. I walked down the aisle slowly, my heels clicking on the wooden floor. When I got to the front, I turned to face the guests. I introduced myself, told them I was Jake's ex-girlfriend, that we'd dated for 3 years before he cheated on me with Megan. There were gasps, whispers. Jake tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. I said I wouldn't be here except they'd invited me. They'd sent me a card saying they valued my friendship, so I figured they'd want to know the truth about the man they were celebrating. Then I pulled out my phone. I'd loaded all the screenshots and photos onto it. I started reading messages out loud. Messages between Jake and Sarah. Messages where he admitted to cheating on his first fiancée, where he begged her not to tell his family, where he promised he'd changed. I showed photos of text messages between Jake and other girls. Girls he'd been talking to while engaged to Sarah, while dating me, even while dating Megan. Jake tried to grab my phone, but I stepped back. Megan was crying. Her face had gone from confused to horrified. Jake's mom was standing up yelling at me to stop. But I kept going. I said Jake had a pattern, that he cheated on everyone he dated, that he lied and manipulated and played the victim when he got caught. I said Megan probably thought she was special, that she'd won, but she hadn't. She was just next in line. Then I looked at Megan and said she deserved to know who she was marrying, that if she still wanted to go through with it, that was her choice, but she should make it with full information. The room exploded. People were shouting. Jake was yelling at me to get out. His groomsmen were trying to escort me away, but I'd already said what I needed to say. I walked back down the aisle and out the door. Behind me, I could hear chaos. Megan screaming at Jake, his family arguing, guests talking loudly trying to figure out what just happened. I got in my car and drove away. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I found out later that the wedding didn't happen. After I left, Megan confronted Jake about everything I'd said. He tried to deny it at first, but too many people had seen the proof. His mom confirmed the story about Sarah. One of his groomsmen admitted he'd known Jake was texting other girls. Megan took off her dress and left. The guests went home. The reception was canceled. Jake was left standing there alone in his tux while his family yelled at him. Sarah texted me the next day. She said she'd heard what happened through mutual friends. She thanked me for finally telling the truth. She said she'd spent years wondering if she'd made the right choice leaving him. Now she knew she had. A few of Jake's friends reached out to me. Some were angry, said I'd ruined his life, said what I did was cruel, but others thanked me, said they'd always suspected something was off about him, but never had proof. Megan sent me a message a week later. She said she was sorry, that she'd believed Jake when he said I was crazy and jealous, that she didn't know he'd been lying to her too. She said she was moving out and starting over. I felt bad for her in a way. She'd been lied to just like I had, just like Sarah had. Jake was good at making people believe him, good at playing the victim, good at making you think you were the problem. But I don't regret what I did. Not for a second. Jake had spent years getting away with hurting people. Someone needed to hold him accountable. And if that someone had to be me, so be it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm just free. Free from wondering if I could have done something different. Free from blaming myself for not seeing the signs earlier. Free from carrying the weight of his lies. What I learned is that some people will never change. They'll keep hurting people until someone stops them. And sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's just telling the truth. Jake invited me to his wedding, thinking I'd either ignore it or show up and pretend everything was fine. He underestimated me. He thought I'd stay quiet like Sarah did, like all his other victims probably did. But I didn't. I showed